All right. Hello, 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 hello. Welcome back to the Full Stack Journalism podcast. This is our third episode now. And just a quick introduction to me. My name's Sabrina Faramazi. I run an organization called Are We Europe? The question is implied in the name. And a lot of what we do is thinking and applying different ways of executing independent media and independent journalism across the continent, not just within the borders of the EU. And as part of our work, we are a member of a network called the Reference Network, which is a network of independent media organizations around Europe. And it is a self-organized network, and a lot of the things that we do are about supporting each other and finding different ways to survive in our current media hellscape. And a year ago, a lot of those conversations started to kind of circle around technology and our use of technology as independent media. And that's how the Full Stack Journalism Project was born. And in our first year, we really focused on, okay, what alternatives are out there and what are the challenges that we're dealing with. And in this second phase, it's really about hearing from the experts who develop and execute and build these things. And so, yeah, I'm really excited to introduce you to our speakers. But maybe first of all, what the hell does full stack actually mean? It's very much around, it refers to the kind of complete set of technologies and layers involved in building web applications or other kinds of technological infrastructure. And it refers to both the back end and the front end. And the last couple of episodes, we really focused on that kind of infrastructure in the back end, and slowly we're starting to move towards the front and how they engage with different actors, not just journalists, but also other technologists. And so, yeah, in this episode, we're really exploring how journalism and media can kind of regain control over our tools without necessarily always requiring the deep technical expertise. Of course, we are journalists first. We can't do everything. We are merely human, even if sometimes a human in the loop. And really looking at how the intersection between newsroom labor, technology design, and editorial independence, and how we can kind of create a more democratic media ecosystem. And so, yeah, I'm excited to introduce our speakers, and our conversations will be informed by Irma Mastenbroek, who does a number of very cool things, but mostly focuses on the ways that people meaningfully participate in how technology is governed. She's building a movement called the Right to Flip Phone. So definitely want to hear more about that. And which is all about exploring the kind of disconnection and, resisting extractive technological infrastructures. She also uses experimental tools like girl math. We were also admiring the girl math shoes earlier, which is all about kind of mapping the invisible patterns behind people's engagement with systems. So from algorithms to access, and looking through tech governance through a intersectional feminist and participatory lens, and as well around how these kinds of infrastructure engage with people offline, and where different communities come into that. We'll also hear from Zoe Cooper, who is a designer for Open Refine, which is a project of Code for Science and Society. I'd love to hear more about that. And is both a journalist and designer, and applies her design expertise to open source data tools. She's also a accomplished writer and has appeared in publications like Vox, Al Jazeera, and also serves as an editor for Impossible Object Books. Impossible Object Books. Nice. And has really interesting kind of cross-industry and cross-topic expertise, and how that applies to technology and media. And then finally, we have Friedrich Lindenberg, who is the founder of Open Sanctions and has built tools for investigative journalists all across Europe, from open data platforms to different types of transparency systems, and is a long-term proponent of the open source ethos and always challenges us to consider who controls the back end of journalism. So this is a great way to start. And so maybe before we begin, we can talk a little bit more about how you kind of came to this work. We can start with you, Irma.
So my work being like platform governance, I guess. Yeah. So at some point I was a researcher at the Alexander von Humboldt Institute. And I did research in fairness metrics in artificial intelligence systems. And I basically pointed out that those math equations were almost incapable of doing intersectional justice. And also were not really focused on any sort of historical justice movement. And I was, invited to speak at the roundtable for the European Commission, and then was researching the European AI Act on like feminist topics, because this was what I was asked to talk about. And I realized that a lot of things that the people kind of care about never reach the regulation, because I thought, for instance, okay, let's look at deepfake pornography. You know, is one of the biggest known harms of AI. And I look like, and it's just not in there. It's not mentioned at all. It's like a 300-page document that is supposed to say something about harms, and it fully flies over that, you know. And then I started to realize, oh, it's like really, really deep, this, you know, because kind of all of the money that flows inside research and inside everything, the structure behind all that is also big tech money, kind of, you know, or it's governments who are scared to say certain things, and like, you know, poor little girls and boys on the street, they don't have any money to spend on big research projects or something. And so if there is no capitalist incentive behind the thing you're trying to prove, then it's just not gonna end up even in the law, you know. So I started to realize this is a fully, like, this is not gonna work, you know. So I stepped more or less, I'm still inside this system to at least like work with the pieces of law that I have. But I also started to realize, okay, we really need to do something as a movement, like as a people. We need to say like, okay, you know, enough is enough, and we're stopping to believe in all of the like ethical AI or responsible AI, and start to see it for like, the more or less empty shell that is. And like, it's just my story to bring to the people, like, you have the right to revolt against these systems, like you, and the system being anything from the law to the platforms itself to the people justifying it, and the courses you have in university, like everything. You are allowed to have, you know, fighting opinions about those things.
And where did girl math come into this?
Right. Well, let's say I started with a project called Girl Blogging to Save the Internet, where I actually, that ties into what we are doing here quite well, where I said like, oh, actually kind of nothing is holding you back from just making a page on the internet. You don't have to be on the platform. You can make your own website, and we can share with each other how we do that. And then like, you just make little, I thought, you know, do it offline and make these courses where you can just program your little website together and like make it super, like, you know, super far removed from how platforms work, you know, where it's just like, oh, you have this little room inside and just anything that you want to happen can happen inside, you know. And HTML and CSS has been around, like, so you can just go back to that. Like, no one is really forcing you to be on these platforms. We can shape the internet how we want it. And then because I was already sort of in the girlosphere mindset, I was like, okay, because we need a sort of a way to keep the boys out. And by that I mean like not the actual young men, but I mean like the tech bros. You know, we need to make sure that this movement is something different than all the grassroots movement that come from them, because I'm not saying something extremely new, but I just thought if we culturally code it as girl, that just helps for making it more fun. And then girl math as a thing, like as a meme, came by, and I was like, oh, that's great. I'm like so happy to see this new way of thinking, and I started to see how girl math works. So for people who don't know, it's for instance saying like, oh, anything I spend in cash is free. Like I don't have to, because it's not
No
going off of my
consequences.
account. Hmm?
There's no consequences.
Yes, exactly. And it's kind of like if you want to buy something, then you apply some girl math to your situation and you justify this unnecessary spending that you don't need, and like you do it in this way that is like super anti, like capitalist, well, not anti-capitalist, but anti-logic way, but you're using logic for your own good. And that's when I started to realize, I mean, as math, it's fine. Like, this is totally okay math. It's just that we are not used to defining, like, the profit function in the way that you would define it in girl math. But it's just a profit function in the end, You just say, like, oh, I define my profit as, like, the difference between the shirt that I brought back to the store and the money I get back. So that's just the profit. Deal with it. And I think by that I try to sort of give everyone the understanding of like math is fully made up. It's used, to justify large corporations' ideologies in a way that seems objective, but it's just their values being ingrained in systems. And once you start going through that, you're like, oh, but then we can just ingrain our values into logic. Why not? Like, so I just encourage everyone to keep doing that and feel free to, make up math, because that's what it really is, So if you see something structural happen and you want to write it down in math, no one's holding you back, You can do it.
If the math is not mathing, make it math.
Make it math. That's right.
Nice. We'll math back to that. Zoe, how about you? How did you get to this work?
How did I get to this work? It was kind of a mixed path. I actually started out in the gallery and museum world, working in publications. I was lucky enough to get a fellowship to go to work at the Uffizi in Florence, Italy, right after college, which led me to work in galleries in New York and their publishing departments. And then one thing led to another, and I was at Filmmaker Magazine, which is an independent but though long-running magazine focused on the independent film community in Brooklyn. And so I kind of came from the art and editorial world. And as I kept writing for more places and eventually moved from New York to Berlin, I started to see how, a lot of the most interesting conversations were actually happening in the design space. And I started to see how design thinking and a lot of the projects I would come across at different conferences like I Am, where I think I saw you speak, Sabrina, felt like there was a sort of an overlap there that people weren't seeing, that design work takes a lot of researching and interviewing people and crafting narratives out of your findings in order to create whatever best suits a certain problem, say it's a digital interface, an object, etc. And that felt really similar to me to journalistic work, whether it's investigative reporting or cultural criticism. And so I started to see sort of an overlap there. And that's when I started working as a designer and writing and editing at the same time, which, ultimately led me to OpenRefine. And OpenRefine is an open source tool that's used for cleaning messy data. So it's used by a lot of data journalists, a lot of scientists, and it's sort of adjacent to and very popular in the Wikimedia community, because a lot of very dedicated Wikimedia contributors are able to use it to parse a lot of data and add it to Wikimedia kind of all at once. And because it's an open source project that's funded sort of by multiple foundations, it's not beholden to the kind of big tech money you were talking about. So that's been a really interesting kind of cross section of like lots of different people who are using the same tool to do research in very different fields, be it arts and culture, hard sciences that I personally don't understand, archivists. So yeah, so like to give you an example of a recent project we did, we worked on redesigning the operation history. So like when you use Photoshop, there's a little history window that adds like the layers. You can see every action you've taken. So the idea was that we could do that for data sheets, and you could either share that and keep that for yourself, or share it with the team, or share it with the wider community, so that the ways in which you're manipulating data could be traced, and that interaction could be redesigned. So it's sort of a record of your actions and the way that you read information. So yeah, that's kind of what led me there.
I mean, that's really interesting, especially in terms of like, understand your actions, which is a very arts and design approach, right? Of like, how did I get there and how can I recreate it? Which of course we have with more sophisticated, data analysis tools and things like that. But from a kind of entry level approach, it's not always the case, right? Are there any other sort of approaches that you've taken from arts and culture and design world into this that you can think of?
Yeah, I would say the biggest thing is thinking in terms of metaphor. So for this particular operation history, we called it project, I just started like sketching out receipts. So like if the operation history could look like a receipt, like what would the gesture be on an interface in order to rip something out, or to pull something together, or to compile it in a pile in a literal visual sense. And some of the ways that I thought about doing that was just doing like what people in design call narrative prototyping, which is as if you sort of write an essay as if you are the user doing this, or you're watching someone else do it. And then you translate that written text into, in this case, a digital interface or a physical object. So yeah, I think there's a lot of room for artists and writers to intervene in sort of this at the infrastructural level of tools that initially seem highly technical, but once you're sort of the quote unquote creative person in a room full of engineers and scientists, it reflects back to you what it is you're offering, which was a really interesting experience because I'm just so used to working with editors and other writers, and we sort of all speak the same language. But yeah, that sort of interdisciplinary mix has been really nice to see.
And Friedrich, tell me everything about what it is to be a data librarian, which is like the coolest job title.
I picked it myself. It's not real. Yeah, I sort of grew up in like the European hacker community, which has like these old-fashioned ideas that like the internet is kind of a cool idea and enables a bunch of like really nice things. I know that's like not the time we live in, but like this idea of sort of transparency and collaboration, right? So I got really interested sort of in university, and like how can we use the internet to create like transparency of those in power, and how can we collaborate better using the internet. And that brought me into kind of getting really involved in sort of open data activism and like crawling a lot of government data and trying to see like who wants to use this, which then brought me into journalism and kind of trying to work with journalists side by side to say like, okay, here's like 10 interesting things we can find out about like European procurement or about like how lobbying works in the European Union through a database that's published somewhere. And then I also really am fascinated by this idea of online collaboration. So I eventually got involved in sort of bigger cross-border investigative projects where like a lot of journalists from different countries work together and they share source material, they share kind of their insights and leads and try to kind of build a joint story, and like what kind of technical infrastructure can we put in place so that those people have the right tools to do that securely and to do that in a way that kind of gives them good visibility on the information they might have access to. I'm also like a massive groupie of OpenRefine because it's like one of those things that like straddle the boundary between sort of like being hardcore techie tools, but also like being accessible to a lot of journalists and like people who just have like complicated data problems. And that's the kind of things that I'm really interested in developing further. Yeah.
Nice. And I'd like to start with your question, Friedrich, around who controls the back end of journalism, or what kinds of issues do you think journalism is grappling with today?
Oh, it's like one of the things on LinkedIn, the announcement for this session was like, how can we overcome profit? I think like journalism has been so excessively successful at overcoming profit. Like we're broke, right? Like there's no more money in journalism, right? The last money that was there was like the measly ad money that we got after Google took like 90% of it when they sent us through eventually. That's gone now with AI, right? So like it's entirely broke, right? Like the nonprofit world that was basically held up by the US Foreign Department, it turns out, that's gone. And so, yeah, I think we have a little bit of a money problem. And so the back end of journalism right now is like nothing. We're all pretending that it's still kind of working, but like, except if you're a German broadsheet newspaper and people kind of keep subscribing to you, which is absurd. The rest of the world is like utterly and deeply, can I say screwed on a podcast?
Absolutely.
Cool.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really interesting. I mean, I've referenced this already in every single episode, but so much of the structures, the infrastructure, and the tools that we use are actually not made or live in Europe, right?
Mm-hmm.
And when it comes to obviously dependency on things that are made in the US, and the reactions to who is currently in power and changes in policy and of course funding. What other influences do you all think are affecting the back end of journalism?
Well, I think kind of, the question of who controls that stuff is definitely interesting. The question of like who has access to really utilizing things to the level that is sort of up to technical standard, right? Like I feel like journalists for quite a while now have lost sort of the lead in being the best storytellers in public, right? There's so many other people, whether it's like 3 people on TikTok having like a good meme, or whether it's like people making like fake videos that are gaining massive audiences, right? That are like way more innovative than journalists, because like there's this kind of old-fashioned commitment to like it actually being true, or like at least researched, and that's kind of a massive like lump on your foot as you try to race. So I think kind of we've lost sort of the ability to use the kind of means of telling stories better than everybody else. We've also lost the ability to see things, I think there's like a general kind of tendency in the world for less information to be available, for less transparency in how the powerful act. And so that's pretty limited kind of ability to find out things, and limited ability to kind of really reach people in a compelling way.
And I mean, I think that one thing that unites all of you in the work that you do is about transparency, right? And maybe we'll start with you, Irma. How do you, in what kinds of ways are you applying this in your work, and what is the kind of feedback with the people that you're working with? I know you're doing a lot of stuff on the EU AI Act at the moment.
Right. Yeah. So I think if you look at like how companies are diving onto the AI Act, what they really want to make sure is that you think that these things are responsibly designed, right? Like that's what they want you to hear, and that's the story that they want to put out. Also, the European Union wants to like basically position themselves as like the ethical player in the field. And I think what is nice about like the transparency requirement of the EU AI Act, for instance, is that actually the transparency requirement is just there to uncover all the bullshit, kind of, you know? So it just makes sure that you cannot just say, like, oh, we trained it on this thing and then we tested it on this metric and everything good, like nothing to see here, you know? Instead of that, you're gonna have to actually report, like, okay, this is how we tested that, you know? So sort of more the design process of like, how did you make it work well? Unfortunately, now, as you see, there's like so much influence of these big tech companies in setting the standards that they all say like, no, but how we do those things is like company secret. So they're like trying to make it all like, you know, disappear. So I think like the transparency requirement is the one we really, really need. And then the other one is accountability of the thing. So it's kind of like if you can prove that something is harmed because of your algorithm, then you are supposed to be responsible for that because you chose to throw this like algorithm into the world and it has all of these large effects. And yeah, you're supposed to pay the price for everything that is harmed in this process. So yeah, instead of like focusing on fairness metrics and balancing data sets equally or something, which are all like interesting endeavors, we need to really like hold them accountable by the transparency requirement, I think. But in the end, it's like, I just hope that it creates enough visibility for us to seriously uncover it and eventually like, you know, shoot it down, because that's the only real way that we get out of this situation. I think you cannot hope for these tech companies to quote unquote self-regulate. It's not gonna work.
No, I mean, they're too busy chasing the math, right?
Yeah.
Oh.
Boy math ruling the world. I'm sorry for this. Wow.
Oh God, I had a really good question. It's gone now. Yes. So a lot of the discussions that I've been hearing around whether journalists at all understand the AI Act and how are they supposed to hold power to account if they don't understand it. Have you found any effective ways to bring journalists into that?
Yeah, well, I think I have almost always the same answer to this question, where it's like, I think the real problem in the tech world is not that we don't understand the technology. It's more that the technology refuses to understand everyone else. So I think like maybe it's like kind of your experience as being a non-technical person in these spaces. People that want to listen will listen. Like, and it's just that they keep you out of the space, and they do that by like sort of obstructifying the language. And I think it's like very different to be coding a platform. Like, I think that the people who first wrote like the engagement algorithms for big tech companies, yeah, they're just trying to maximize engagement and profit. They didn't think about like filter bubbles, about manosphere issues, about certain things being thrown online. Like, they don't know about the real life effects of their system. That's not ingrained into the formulas. That's something you know by living in culture. And we are all super capable of understanding what's going on. And I can tell you, I understand nearly everything they're saying. And I just think that what they are saying is just less interesting in a way, because they are so inside their own bubble and their own reasoning that they just become difficult to negotiate with or to make stuff together with. And they hide behind the tech kind of language, you know, they hide behind it because actually it's their responsibility to either explain it well to us, but most of all, just listen to whatever the heck everyone else has to say. And right now, they're not even used to, like, they've never been regulated in the past before, you know? Like, now with the European legislation, it's like now the first time that platforms have to kind of make sure that they don't ruin society. But before then, it was just like, oh, just, you know, build fast, break things, you know? Like, they just didn't care. Like, they've been always clear about that. And I think that we just need to tell them, like, we want you to care. We need you to care. Like, it's time for you to start caring about these things. And I don't know, I read the law and it's really not that hard. Kind of, it says like, if your program does harm, measure the harm, find mitigation strategies, do something about it, then measure the harm again, show that it worked. You know, this is not that technical, you know? So I think that they're trying to keep you out, you know, that's the thing. And you need to just uncover like, no, actually, this affects all of us, and therefore we need to all have access to these conversations. So yeah.
Oh, absolutely. And Zoe, how does transparency? How is that applied in your work? I know that's an abstract question, but as a arts and design person, and I guess the sort of follow-up question to that is, what kind of challenges are you seeing that journalists are facing?
Sure. I can answer that from the design perspective first. I mean, this is unique to an open source project, but every change that's made, at least once a week, we post publicly on a blog, and then people who are involved with Open Refine, either they have a position on the board or they're an especially involved volunteer or even a first-time volunteer, can respond and say like, no, I don't like that color, or this doesn't make sense to me, or, you know, have you tried this? So there's really no bar to entry in terms of in that sense. And that means that the tool is developed, as many software tools are, incrementally and transparently. The tension I'm really seeing there is that, you know, we're talking about journalists designing tools for journalism. The news moves much, much faster than that. So I think that's really like the tension that I'd like to see. I mean, there are questions of transparency, but there are also questions of speed that come with that. I don't quite have the answer, but I think that's something to put out there. And then, yeah, I mean, I think, you know, I in terms of like writing and reporting, I think the question of like, of figuring out how like AI writing is coming into play or not. The challenges I'm seeing is that, you know, there are like understood structures, or almost, I don't want to say algorithms, but there are conventions that journalists are used to sticking to. And I think that there's a sort of longer view that writers of all kinds can lend to the question of like, does this article clearly look like AI, or does it look like a reporter? In this, because like I think we've been thinking about this for a long time, right? Like since the 60s, people have been writing about like combinatorial and using combinatorial analysis in order to unpack narrative or literature, or what even started out as a way to analyze fashion magazines. And so I think, I don't know, I guess there's a long view to this stuff that I think is being ignored. That's my take.
And are there, so for context, a lot of this project is, you know, I guess our big question is, what does a public tech stack for journalism look like? And at the moment, we're building a database of alternatives, but of course, you know, what are the different ways in which they can speak to each other, and how can these organizations and the platforms that they build in the first instance actually survive long enough, you know, by the time we've sort of switched over and things like that. So, and I'll start with you, Friedrich. What is your sort of vision? If you could imagine a public tech stack for journalism, what would that look like? What would that feel like? What would it act like? Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like it has to be measured by like relevance to journalism, right? So we have like these problems that we're trying to solve, right? Which is, number one, we want to find something important out about society that we need to tell people about, right? Number two, we want to tell it compellingly, and number three, we want to pay everyone involved in the process fairly, right? And like if we can figure out these three problems, then like wonderful. And like I would try to kind of focus journalism to only touch technology if it's going to have like an immediate payoff on one of those things, and if it gives us a unique leverage on doing it, right? Because like in general, I think kind of having technology wrapped in journalism, right, like it's kind of a liability, right? Like it's building technology is incredibly expensive, and so you want to do the least of it at all possible, right? You want to run in like an economical way, you want to run like the least of your own infrastructure as possible, right? And you want to kind of pick the ones where it actually matters, right? So if we're going to be processing information that comes from a confidential source, that's when we have to like pull all the stops out and kind of do our own thing, because we have like an ethical obligation to kind of do that in a way that is fully controlled and understood, right? Whereas kind of hosting our everyday email, maybe that's not a thing that journalists are qualified to do or should waste time frankly doing, right? And so like kind of how close is it to like where we produce value in journalism, right? And it has to be either telling a great story, or it has to be finding one, or it has to be making money on, unfortunately.
And whose responsibility do you think it is to deliver all of this? The journalists, the technologists?
I think like the editors, and like I come from this world of nonprofit journalism. I spent like 15 years there, and there is also the funders, right? Because I think the funders have been engaging with technology in a way that's really sort of focused on gimmick, right? It's like saying, hey, we're gonna take this new buzzword that's really big, whether it's VR, whether it's gone as far as like blockchain, right? And like take the latest buzzword and like throw $200,000 at that and like see what comes out, right? And in a way that is kind of creative, but it's also not focused on any of these problems as a starting point, right? Like, and I think like the weird thing is that journalists have been the least good at using technology to kind of try and solve the third problem, right? Like everybody has made a killing in the digital world except for the people who put most of the content online. And I think it's maybe that's blaming the victim a little bit, but like I feel like journalism in its engagement with technology has also like reliably kind of taken the shiny object over sort of asking hard questions about monetization and revenue and like where's the money going, because it's always going to Google. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I would 100% second everything you just said. I think it's like a larger annoyance I've felt in a lot of fields where it's like, in order to say something useful about technology, we're just gonna throw all of our money at technologists, and like that's just giving like the tech bro all of everything, kind of. And it is indeed extremely expensive, or it was. Like now they are also all on the street. But I think it's also maybe the question of like, do you need a full tech stack, or should we look at like technology more in like this broader sense of everything? You know, like maybe you want to project your story on the pavement without asking for permission or something. I don't know. Like, you know, there's ways of using all sorts of human inventions, which is basically what technology is, that is kind of outside of this whole platform knowledge, right? Or like logic, you know, like to just zone in on this thing that like the tech bros are doing. What you're also just doing is like perpetuating their like problems. So I don't know, maybe Substack is an interesting example in this regard, because that was started as quite, and I think still also functions very well within the system of like platform governance, or like platforms that do journalism in some, well, writing maybe a better word. But it kind of runs into the same issue, you know, if you have this small little screen, then you're gonna have to choose who is on the top, and you would be crazy if you wouldn't do that in a profit maximizing way. Like that's just the only way you're gonna do that. And you can come up with all of these like ethical alternatives, but they're just gonna make less money, and therefore you can do less journalism, you know? So I think there's such a trap in wanting everything to be on these screens and that being your only solution. Yeah, that's so I fully second what you are saying. And also like you can find so many things online that if you are interested in how can we use technology for this article we're writing, we'll hire a coder for this one project, and then they are able to find all the tools you need on the internet, because that's just all out there, you know? You don't need a big private tech stack for that. Yeah. Or public for that matter, but like closed system, you know? Like the internet's so big, there's so much to find everywhere.
Oh yeah, I mean, I would just add to the Substack thing is that it's, you know, it's produced a lot of great work. But another issue I would point out is that when you are a sole writer writing a Substack, you definitely can't do anything investigative that might, you know, elicit legal action from powerful people, because you don't have legal protection. A few people on the platform do, but most people don't. you don't have editors, you don't have fact checkers. That leaves you, open to a lot of issues that being employed at a broadsheet would not. So I would just add that in there.
Yeah, I mean, Substack has definitely received its layer of criticism recently, but I do think this is a very interesting thing to highlight in the vulnerability of journalists, whilst replicating sort of creator-led platforms and the rise of the journalist influencer and things like that also makes a lot of space for vulnerabilities, and then when we're talking about there's other alternatives like Ghost, for example. We know that 404 Media has and a bunch of others as well has found profitability with those platforms, and it is collaborative, and it is a real newsroom, and not just not that solo journalists aren't real mini newsrooms in their own right. But the best journalism is done collaboratively, and the best journalism is done together, right? And when we're talking about a public stack, it's also how can we continue to work together in these things. And there's been a recent critical media report around the funding of non-profit European media organizations from a Hungarian think tank, very much sort of critiquing this sort of European narrative, right? And a lot of that also relies on the kinds of infrastructure that we build. So yes, in non-profit media, and especially for independent media, a lot of the way that in which we survive is by collaborating together on projects. And why shouldn't we also be collaborating together on a public stack? And what that potentially looks like, and some kind of alternatives and discussions have also been maybe some of the larger independent newsrooms that are building their own products. So instead of using a US based audio software, you can use something like Zetland's, or instead of maybe using other kind of community building software, you can use something like B2B from Correctiv, a German newsroom. Are there other examples that you've used or found that you've thought that were really useful, or other kinds of more collaborative approaches to building a tech stack for media?
I'm not sure if any one of us has built a tech stack.
I have. I spent a lot of time building sort of like data mining tools for investigative journalists, right? Like trying to, okay, you have a leak of 10,000 documents, right? What do you do with that? How do you kind of securely share it with other people? But it's like a very localized problem, right? And like, it's a problem that's not worth for like a big platform to solve. And weirdly enough, Google at some point did decide to solve it. But then like you're uploading all your documents to Google Drive, and some people don't want that. And yeah, like the question there is like, how can we keep that going long term, right? Like, so we've built like a forensic tool for data analysis, right? And then the grant runs out, and like, how do you keep it going after that, right? Because like, I think something that also like a lot of people in journalism who are not used to technology don't understand is that this stuff gets kind of more expensive to run over time, rather than that like, I think there's this idea that like we build it and then it's like building a house, right? That's just gonna stand there for 40 years and like give you shelter, right? Like that's not how technology works. It's just becoming more expensive every day you operate it, right? Because like sooner or later, right, you need to pay a bigger hosting bill, you need to kind of build in like compliance stuff even, and things like that, right? And so yeah, that I think no one is really prepared for at all.
Yeah, and I'm also kind of thinking about like the alt-right famously has quite literal tech stacks. So they just buy a shit ton of phones and then put SIM card in each phone, and then just drive up engagement by sending these, like these bot farms basically onto your article. So in that sense, I'm like, if you're playing the game, play the game, like, because we are on the left always saying those things are wrong, and they are wrong, but they are also wrong because they're used for the wrong reasons, and we see them used in a corner that we disagree with. But I sometimes think, yes, it is unethical, the things they are doing, but letting journalism die is also not good, So in that sense, and also maybe even as a source of, maybe it's like resistance in a certain sense, that you're like, all right, what you're doing, we're gonna do that too, we're just gonna play the game dirty and then expose the fact that they are doing the same. Because, oh boy, will they start complaining, like the Trumps of this world, if that starts to work. But then we just can say, yeah, well, we learned that from you. So, yeah. And I don't know, like sometimes, like, tech is just ugly and dirty is kind of where I'm going at, If you want to win at tech, you're going to have to think like a tech bro, and you're going to have to, just pump money into artificially driving up your engagement. That's how you win that game. And then, I don't know, if you want to do something different with your time, then maybe we should not use technology for that, in that sense. I don't know if that is a very useful argument to bring into a tech stack conversation, but I'm just like, the logic is flawed. Like the whole system is rigged. So either do it and win, or do something different, I would say.
How can we finalize that into a sort of practical solution other than
so,
just
like,
win?
Well, so I don't know. Yeah, it's more like understand how the dynamics of these platforms really work. And if you do them for long enough, as we have been doing now, then you start to realize, oh, wait, as soon as people start to understand how the game works, then the people with the power win everything, because they can just throw more money at it. That's, again, an issue, right? So I don't know. And then sometimes I'm like, okay, right, so we are a people's movement, so you need to sort of get the people on your side to join this, like, let's say, like resistance by beating them at their own game or something. But again, I'm like, I don't know if that's a game you want to play. Like, I don't know if it's something but maybe it will be good to do it just to prove a point in some way. Like, and I don't know. I've been suggesting for people to. Oh no, we will go there later, I think. So I'll take it back.
Go there now. Okay. So one of the best parts about this podcast is that it is recorded in front of a live audience at Publix, so we can take your live questions. Does anyone have any?
Should we give you a mic?
That's on me, guys.
Hi, thank you.
Yeah, it works.
It works, yeah. My name is Philip. I work as an investigative reporter. Also, I'm helping to develop data gathering tools for journalists. And I'm probably in some way continuing the Irma's line of thought. Have you thought about any subversive tech tools that were appearing in the recent times that we can use possibly for revolt our journalism work? Because we talk a lot about building community solidarity, and it's of course extremely important, but we need to somehow game this game.
Yeah.
It's bad.
Yeah. So I don't know. Like, for instance, historically, the right was always better at memes, kind of, and then at some point, the left started to do more, coming from like, let's post a black square on Instagram. We started to also go a little bit more, let's say rogue, or a bit more like doing the, how would you call it again, clickbait type. We started to just be better at it, and started to develop this thing. And so, I don't know, it's maybe, I would say like get some bots and get your engagement up and report on that you have been doing that. Like, just say that like, that's what you've been doing or something like this. I don't know. Like, I don't know, because in the end you kind of want to, make sure that eventually the system is somehow healed from the outside, because journalisms are not going to heal that whole world by themselves, but they have a role in like uncovering the bullshit that's going on. And what better way there is than to use their tactics? So I don't know, anything you know about like why is the right so good at what they do? I always say like, okay, they've been really good at touching upon the manosphere, right? Like they're like, oh, we touch upon men who are lonely. I'm like, okay, so touch upon men who are lonely, right? Or if you see that people are like going down this route of like, oh, let's go to more traditional values because they're basically like, what sort of rendering of the matrix are we living in now? Like, let's go back to farming. Then you can just say like, hey, but we on the left actually think the same, and it's called cottagecore, you know? And so to sort of hook yourself into the platform dynamics that are already on your side, which in this case is, for instance, the girlosphere or like all of those types of meme categories, and just hook your story onto those and understand what people are like engaged about, and just like start beating them at this game, you know? But also you have to lose ethics along the way, or write down clearly what you have been doing and why you have been doing it as such. So you could maybe find like a whole group of journalists to do this all together, and you just say like, okay, we're gonna just like report on how we got this story so big. You know, we just did all the dirty tricks in the book, and then by the time that the story is really big, you just bring out like, actually, we did all of this by, you know, doing all these dirty tricks or whatever. I don't know, but do something extremely disruptive. And if you don't have any engagement on the platform, that's gonna be hard. Yeah. So
Break things.
yeah, break things.
And we have a question from one of our online viewers for Friedrich, which is, what open source solutions and tools for journalists are feasible for newsrooms to build themselves?
Oh, feasible, like, I don't know, like it depends on how much money you have, right? If you have no money, then nothing is feasible. If you have money from somewhere, then a lot of you can build Facebook, right? If you see the point of doing it. I think kind of the question to me would like still be like, how does it make your life better, right? And I feel like there should be way more newsrooms investing into things that are going to help them monetize what they're doing, right? Like we've all been spending so much time on like, I don't know, does anyone remember Snowfall? Right, these like big scrolly telling stories, right? And like we've done all that, right? Like I think kind of the most expensively told story in the world has been produced, and now it's coming back and figuring out how we can actually like make it sustainable again, right? And I feel like piggybacking into like what can we do that's a bit subversive. Also like this idea of like saying when you don't see it. I feel like so many journalists have been watching technology, right? And I feel like there's this very almost visceral feeling of disruption. It's like touching, you know, one of those cow wires where like the cows are locked in, you touch them and you get this shock, right? And so I feel like journalists have been shocked for like 20 years by technology, right? And like every time something new gets built, like they get slapped with like a high voltage shock. And I feel like we need to kind of get out of the habit of like pretending that we're with it, right? Like I think like journalism when it comes to technology has been really obsessed with like pretending that the next big thing is really the next big thing, in part because we don't want to be seen admitting that we don't get like how is like right now I think kind of the big narrative is like AI is going to cost us all our jobs, right? And then there's like the reality of it, which is that there's a box on the internet and you type something into it and like it's giving you back a very verbose piece of bullshit most of the time, right? And like yeah, and like we're all sort of pretending that this is like the future of like the economy is like being able to generate advertising copy in copious amounts, right? And like we're now kind of promulgating this narrative that like the labor market's gonna die, right? Which serves like very specific political ends. And like we're all kind of not saying it as we see it anymore when it comes to technology. We're kind of trying to pretend that we get it more than there is, right? And like I think the tech world hasn't actually built anything in a long time, right? Like the internet's kind of done, like mobile phones were probably the last real thing that tech built. And like, we're all trying to pretend that like the next big thing is coming and that we're going to be the first one to recognize it. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, and I would like to chime into this sentiment a little bit with, if you look at younger generations, all they really want is to connect to one another. You know, if you see what are the things that we are engaged on, then it's like, oh, we're lonely. We kind of just want to dance a bit more and like flirt a bit more and like, you know, maybe have a girlfriend every so once in a while, you know. And that's like, it's really touching on something quite deep in our generation that's very different than the people who have lived through the 90s, who are like, oh, cool, this new technology. And right now we are just like, you know, the younger generation is just like, I don't know, man. Like, and I'm really happy to see all of that. Like, I was happy to see that, like, the general sentiment around AI was like, oh, we're cooked. Like, you know, the whole platform was just like, we are so cooked. Like, you know, every time a new technology, like the AI generation would become better and get better. And then everyone's just like, oh my God, like, we're not going to survive this. And I'm like, you're right. Like, you know, and in the end, it's good that the internet is dying. Why not? You know, let's go do something else with our time. And I don't know, a lot of young people want to like build houses and have a future, and maybe we can do those things. Yeah.
True. But I think we have one last question, and then one more online, and we'll wrap up. But yeah, go for it, Philip.
Conversation. My question to the honored gentleman here about the backend, because always the headache for journalists who controls the backend, and later when a lot of newspapers or online magazine or platform dies to any sort of funding cut or anything, those information on those materials became part of the internet history. So, and still journalists and media companies complain about like, because most of them, they don't control the backend. So there any good news for them, or they can die with the internet, or as their platform will be gone?
I don't have a good crystal ball on that right now, what kind of the future is. I think like specifically what you want to control is the billing system, right? Like you want to control the Stripe integration. Everything else is like faff. And I think we really shouldn't be like too hung up over whether our AI models, if we're going to use them, are like organic and free range, and whether they've been grown in European territorial waters, or like whether they're from California, right? Like it's like the
Are we
salmon
suffering?
tastes the same, right? Like
Let's make our own evil.
yeah, it's just you need to have the credit card information in the end. I don't know how to get it. Sorry. Not helpful.
I'm only thinking of salmon now. One last question before we wrap up, and this one has come from one of our online viewers for Zoe. And they're asking, Open Refine is one of the few tools that has stayed open and hasn't sold out to big tech. What is the motivation for that, and how do we embed open source thinking into more tech tools?
You know, I think the best way to the best way to do that is to have more foundations and more grants that allow projects like Open Refine to continue. You know, these kinds of projects are really financially tenuous. Anything connected to US-based science foundations, not doing well right now, as many of these projects are. So to give the sort of obvious answer, it's really a financial question. That's the biggest challenge I see. But yeah, what was the first part that I might have missed?
How did Open Refine stay open and not get sold?
You
to big
didn't sell
tech
your
yet?
soul.
Grants, and there should be more of them.
So to wrap up, the back end of journalism is grants.
Money.
Yeah. Yeah.
How did you have the?
Hello, thank you for the great conversation, Sam, former journalist, tech person right now. So actually, there's one thing, we know all the tech we see in the world, every piece of program is based on public funding. nothing came out. No Mark Zuckerberg was like so smart to come up with everything by themselves. So since we have the basis, it's in the public, and we have in Germany something really everyone hates. That's the TV tax that we pay every month. Can't we funnel some of this? I mean, you're in governance, as I understood. Can't we funnel some of that money into building some, software or like algorithm, let's call it, to help journalism in that sense? Thank you.
I think it's quite reasonable actually to start asking of tech companies to like mop up a bit of the mess they make, because I think a lot of the work that you do as a journalism are like uncovering systems of injustice, and in the world that is currently run by big tech, it's just often gonna end up being about them or somehow caused by them, you know. So in that sense I'm thinking, yeah, there's quite a good it's I think a reasonable ask of like to European Commission or to ask of maybe the organizations, the conglomerate of civic society organizations that is writing the tech law, to also write in there like, okay, but who is gonna do that? Because like investigative journalism is dead, it's underfunded, it's not here anymore. So nice that you have transparency, but then what? Like, and they are now sort of starting their like AI office or whatever, and yeah, I think it's reasonable to start asking like, okay, where, like, how are we doing that, and how do we make sure that we are not dependent on these big tech platforms, but that they just have to pay some taxes to the European Union, and that then journalists can just take out of that pot to do their journalism, because that's the whole reason for the law to even exist. So I think it's a really reasonable request. Yeah, also good luck getting it done, because also the law is fully governed by big tech companies. But yeah, that's just something that over time hopefully will expose and crumble. Let's hope.
But like, I think you're spot on, right? That is exactly the right model, right? Because it's arm's length from the government, right? Like it's designed to be independent, right? It's, I don't know, somewhere north of 8 billion euros every year in Germany. Unfortunately, the one that we have, the Rundfunk, is like mostly pension commitments. So there's only so much money there that we can actually like do stuff with anymore. So maybe we need to create a new one. Maybe it's funded by a digital tax, but it could be the same governance model of being arm's length. And then you're like, if you think in those dimensions, right, like 8 billion euros a year in Germany alone, right? I think like the non-profit investigative world in total is like between 100 and 200 million worldwide. So that fits in there a couple of times, right? A good number of times. And so like that would be fun. Maybe it could also provide every citizen like an email box that is kind of run at a good level of standard. I don't know how big the Gmail team is, but I guess it's like 2,000 people. Hire those, make them do it without surveillance. Fun. Yeah, like I think that would be really cool, having like more arm's length kind of public funding models around that stuff. Sorry.
All right. So unfortunately, we have to wrap up. Just when it got real exciting. I'm joking. It was exciting the whole time. Love it. We can carry on the conversation outside, but I will just say goodbye also to our live stream and our online viewers on LinkedIn right now, and also just want to say thank you to our speakers. We will be taking a summer break for the podcast, but we'll be back in July. Thanks, everyone.